Hello and welcome to Study History with Mr. P and my topic summary video about the rising against Tostig in 1065. Now Tostig had become the Earl of Northumbria in 1055. Remember, Tostig Godwinson is the brother of Harold Godwinson. So Northumbria was a large and important earldom that guarded the border with Scotland. It had a long association though with Vikings, and being so far from the south made it an obvious entry point for any Viking invasion. Much of this part of the country was under Danelaw, which were parts of England that had retained parts of Anglo-Danish law and phrases. The uprising began with rebels marching on York. During this, many of Tostig's housecarls and servants were killed, and the rebels invited Morcar, who was the brother of the Earl of Mercia, to become their earl, and Tostig was declared an outlaw. But why did this happen in the first place? Well, there are a number of reasons for the uprising. One was that Tostig was from the south, was a southerner. Northumbria had always been governed by northerners, and the southern Anglo-Saxon kings had generally left the north to its own and to govern themselves, but Tostig didn't do so. Tostig actually taxed Northumbria very heavily, too heavily. Danelaw areas were not used to heavy taxation, and so the Northumbrians resented this greatly. In addition to this, Tostig had ordered the assassination of high-born Northumbrians who were rivals whilst they were actually being entertained as his guest. He'd also been quite unjust in imposing new laws on this part of England, laws from the south, and he abused his power to get rid of his rivals. Tostig's enemies complained about this, and people were falsely accused of crimes as well, and Tostig did this in order to make money from them. But another factor that really led to the uprising was also the fact that Tostig had a strong friendship with Malcolm III, the King of Scotland, which meant he didn't defend Northumbria, which bordered on Scotland, from Scottish attacks. For example, while Tostig was away in 1065, Malcolm had invaded and caused a great deal of destruction, but Tostig did not retaliate when he returned and instead agreed peace terms. So all of these were reasons for the rebellions against Tostig. So how was this revolt against Tostig responded to? Well, Harold led the response to the uprising, but he actually went against his brother and agreed with the rebels that Tostig had gone too far. So this is significant because in some ways this weakens the power of the House of Godwin, but it also got rid of a rival to the throne. He therefore supported the choice of Morcar to replace Tostig, which was significant because it showed that Harold was acting a bit like a king already, although he wasn't. Remember, Edward the Confessor was still king at this time. It showed him acting like a king, uniting the kingdom, getting rid of a bad ruler in Tostig, rather than just acting for the good of the House of Godwin. It also cemented Harold's new alliance with Mercia through marriage. Quite importantly as well, at this point, Harold and the other earls had actually disobeyed or failed to obey the King Edward the Confessor's command to raise an army to suppress an uprising. This is really, really important because the earls were honour bound to the king, but it showed that Harold at this point was already taking power from the king. It may possibly even have hastened Edward's death, but it showed he seemed to be acting for what he thought was the good of the kingdom above the wishes of the king himself. Now, 3 months after the rising against Tostig, Edward died in January 1066. On his deathbed, he was meant to have commended the throne. He said, "I commend this woman," his wife Edith, who was Harold's sister, "with all the kingdom to your protection." Harold takes this as a sign that Edward was naming his as successor, but really this is just the icing on the cake for Harold because he sees it as an extension of his response to the rising, where he'd already garnered support for himself becoming king.